What's up, Magic fam? It's Blue here from Blue Bears Games, and for today's video, I will be showing you my newest budget commander build that will be available for sale on the Blue Bears Games Facebook page that uses Elas Il-Kor, Sadistic Pilgrim, as the commander. Before we get started, I'd like to take a moment to ask for your help in supporting my channel, which can be done in the following ways. Subscribing to the channel, sharing any of my content on your socials, watching some of my many other videos, purchasing Super Thanks, purchasing channel memberships, purchasing decks that you may have seen on this channel directly from me on the Blue Bears Games Facebook page, and/or visiting our sponsor at arcane-fortress.com and using discount code BLUEBEAR at checkout if you decide to purchase any of their amazing gaming supplies from them. Anything that you do will help support my channel immensely, and I thank you for it. Now that that is out of the way, let's get to today's video. So, Elas Il-Kor Sadistic Pilgrim on a budget, huh? If you follow my channel, you would know that I recently released a video of my own personal Elas Il-Kor build that was not so budget friendly. That build inspired me to make this budget version available to others so someone else can join in on the fun that I've been having, albeit without the hefty price tag. If you haven't seen my personal build for Elas though, or don't know who she is, let me introduce you to her. Elas is 1 black and 1 white mana to cast for a 2/2 legendary Phyrexian Core Cleric with Death Touch, and then 2 other abilities that this deck's theme will be completely centered around. The first of those abilities says that whenever another creature you control enters, you gain a life, and the second of those abilities says that whenever another creature you control dies, each opponent loses a life. These abilities led me to build a combination of a Soul Sisters life gain and drain build, paired with an Aristocrats theme, but with a unique twist. Instead of going with a solely token-based Aristocrat theme, similar to my personal build, I went with what I call self-recurring creatures on top of some token making. It sounds like a mess when I try to explain it out loud, but trust me, it all gels together quite well, so rather than trying to explain it, why don't I just show you? So as I like to do, I'll start with the lands, and this is a budget land base, so things like Temple of Silence. Yes, it comes into play tapped, but at least it lets you scry on the top card of your library. Orzhov Guildgate, Scoured Barrens. This actually fits the theme of the deck nicely because it lets you gain a life. Thriving Moor and Thriving Heath. Encroaching Waste, because I say it every single time I do a video for a budget deck. I like to have at least one thing that destroys a non-basic land on the table because you never know what you're going to face. Myriad Landscape for deck thinning and for a little bit of ramp because it goes and gets you 2 lands. They have to be the same type, so it can kind of be fixing if you're missing one of the types. So in this case, if you have all swamps out, you can go and get some plains. Evolving Wilds, so mana fixing and again deck thinning. Same thing with Terramorphic Expanse. And then the rest of it's going to be basic swamps, lots of them, a couple more than the plains. As far as the ramp section goes, it's all rocks because white and black don't have permanent solutions to ramping. They have things like Dark Ritual and Culling the Weak, but unfortunately those are one-shots and I wanted some more permanent stuff. So stuff like Traveler's Amulet and Renegade Map, they're mana fixing and they are deck thinning. This is a Felwar Stone. I will have the English version superimposed on the screen for you to read what it does if you don't know what it does. But I thought that the Russian language one looked pretty cool, so I included that one in this. Mind Stone, because later on, if you don't need the mana anymore, you can sacrifice it to draw a card. Charcoal Diamond, and of course, Marble Diamond. They're not the greatest rocks, but they're somewhat better than the 3 mana ones. And then Burnished Heart, and the reason why Burnished Heart is because in a deck that you can get creatures back from your graveyard and get them into play, you can repeatedly do the ability to go get lands. So while it's 3 to cast and 3 to do the ability, in the mid to late game, you can start really getting a lot of lands out of your deck, which is thinning, and technically ramping because you can get to a higher mana value that you can cast from mid to late game. Moving on to the creatures of this deck, this is the biggest section of the deck, and there are 4 different sections. We have Soul Sisters, which is your life gain. We have what I call self-recurring creatures, which is creatures that can return themselves from your graveyard to either your hand or play. You have payoffs, and then you have utility. So I'll start off with the Soul Sisters. All of these creatures will have it so you can gain life when a creature enters play, either on your side or on either anybody's side. However, these are budget ones, so they most likely would just be on your side. So things like Lunarch Veteran, who starts off as a 1/1. If it dies, you can disturb it, turn it into a 1/1 flyer that basically does the same thing. You have Life Creed Duo. This is a 2 to cast 1/2 flyer that lets you gain life whenever a creature enters play under your side. Impassioned Orator, Distinguished Conjurer. It's a little different. It does allow you to gain life whenever a creature enters under your control. However, it actually facilitates that ability. So for 5 and tapping it, you can basically flicker. So you exile another target creature that you control, then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control. So you can flicker or exile a creature on your side, and then when it comes into play, if you have a lot of Soul Sisters out, maybe even Elas Il-Kor, you gain the life for it. Suture Priest, so this one gives you a life whenever a creature enters onto your side, or it makes your opponent lose life whenever they have a creature enter their side. Daxos, Blessed by the Sun, it is a 2-star, and the star is equal to your devotion to white, which means that for each mana pip on the battlefield that is white, its toughness is equal to that. And then, of course, whenever another creature you control enters the battlefield or dies now, you gain a life. And then the last Soul Sister style card is Core Celebrant. It's a 30 cast 1/4 that gives you the life whenever a creature enters on your side. So those are the Soul Sisters. Then we have what I call the self-recurring, which is creatures that can return themselves to either your hand or play depending on the situation. Start off with Retrofitter Transmogrant. It's a 1 cast 1/1 that for 4, you can return it from your graveyard to the battlefield with 2 +1/+1 counters. This is one of the newer ones, and I find this to be a much better one than a lot of the older ones. Persistent Specimen, 1 cast 1/1, you pay 3 and return it from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Sanitarium Skeleton, a 1 cast 1/2 that you pay 3 and return it to your hand. Reassembling Skeleton, this is the best of the whole self-returning creatures in my opinion. It's 2 cast, it's a 1/1, and for 2 you can return it from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Oathsworn Vampire, it enters play tapped, and then you may cast it from your graveyard if you've gained life this turn, and in a deck where you're pretty much just gaining life for almost everything you do, that shouldn't be a problem. Clattering Augur, this one can't block, and then when it enters the battlefield, you draw a card and you lose a life, and being able to do that over and over again is really nice to help repetitive card draw. And then for 4, you can return it from your graveyard to your hand. Brackish Trudge is a 30 cast 4/2 that enters the battlefield tapped, and then for 2, you can return it from your graveyard to your hand, but only if you've gained life this turn, and that caveat is no big deal in this deck. Silver Smote Ghoul is a 3 cast 3/1 that says at the beginning of your end step, if you've gained 3 life this turn, you return it from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped, and then you can pay 2 and sack it to draw a card. Pilgrim of the Ages, so it's a 3 cast 2/1, and it's a white self-recurring creature. That's not really heard of. It says when it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a basic Plains card and put it in your hand, so deck thinning and mana fixing if you need more white, but it helps get lands out of your deck and into your hand so you can put them into play. And then for 6, it returns from your graveyard to your hand, which is weird because there's not a lot of self-recurring white creatures. Skeleton Crew is a 4 cast 3/3 that has an ability that says each other creature you control that's either a skeleton or a pirate gets +1/+1. So a lot of the self-returning creatures are skeletons, and that was the theme that I used in my own personal Elas Il deck, so I wanted to keep it going with a budget version. And then it says whenever 1 or more creature cards leave your graveyard, you create a 2/2 black skeleton creature token. And then it has a self-return ability that for 6, which is expensive, but mid to late game that's not that bad, you can return it from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Now, this isn't a self-recurring creature. This helps facilitate other creatures who don't have that ability. So it's Viconia Drow Apostle, 3 cast 2/3, that says at the beginning of your upkeep, if there are 4 or more creature cards in your graveyard, return a creature card at random from your graveyard to your hand. You could also choose a background, but in this deck, it's not part of the commander section of this deck, so that doesn't matter. This is in here because there are a lot of creatures in here that can't return themselves back to your hand, so this helps facilitate that. And then the last creature that's going to return other creatures back to you is Hell's Caretaker. So this wording is all different now, and I'll have the new wording up there on the screen for you. But essentially what it says is that during your upkeep, you can tap it and sacrifice a creature to return a creature from your graveyard to the battlefield. So that actually facilitates a bunch of other fun things, but the caveat here is that you can only do it during your upkeep. So those are the things that either self-return or return creatures back to your hand for you. Here are the payoffs. The first one is Viscopa Guildmage. It is a 2 cast 2/2 that for 3, you can have target creature gain lifelink on the end of turn, which is useful, but it's the last ability on this that really matters. So for 3 again, you can have whenever you gain life this turn, each opponent loses life. So that actually doubles up on a couple of other things in here that will do the same thing. Marauding Blight Priest is a 3 to cast 3/2 that says whenever you gain life, each opponent loses a life. Markov Purifier is a 3 to cast 2/3 with lifelink that says at the beginning of your end step, if you gained life this turn, you may pay 2 generic mana, and if you do, you draw a card. That's in there for card draw, obviously. Attended Healer is a 4 to cast 2/3 that says whenever you gain life, for the first time each turn, that includes your opponent's turns, you create a 1/1 white cat creature token, and then for each 3 you put into it, you can have another target cleric gain lifelink until end of turn. This is to help give you a couple of extra blockers, some tokens that if they die you can gain life off of. It's just really good utility. Cliffhaven Vampire is a 4 to cast 2/4 flyer that says whenever you gain life, each opponent loses a life. That's the theme here. You're gaining life just to drain your opponents. Epicure of Blood is a 5 to cast 4/4 that does it as well. Starseer Mentor is a 5 to cast 3/5 with flying and vigilance. And then at the beginning of your end step, if you either gained or lost life this turn, you can have target opponent lose 3 life unless they sacrifice a non-land permanent or discard a card. Sir Conrad the Grim. This one's an interesting one. I've made an actual complete deck about this that I did a video for a couple weeks ago. This is a 5 to cast 5/4 that says whenever a creature dies, or a creature card is put into a graveyard from anywhere other than the battlefield, or a creature card leaves your graveyard, Sir Conrad the Grim deals 1 damage to each opponent. A lot of stuff going on there. And then it has this really neat ability to facilitate its own damage dealing ability, where you can pay 2 as many times as you want to have each player mill a card. It's a really good card. It's one of my favorite cards in the last couple years. Cruel Celebrant is a 2 to cast 1/2 that says whenever it or another creature or planeswalker you control dies, each opponent will lose a life and you will gain a life. And then the last card that for this part of it, which is the payoffs, is Falkenrath Noble. It's a 4 to cast 2/2 flyer that says whenever it or another creature dies, and it doesn't have to be your creatures, it could be creatures on anybody's board. If they die, you can have target player lose a life and you gain a life. And then the last creature for this section is going to actually be just a utility card. It's called Spark Reaper. It's a 3 to cast 2/3 that for each 3 you pay into it, and sacrificing a creature or planeswalker, you gain a life and draw a card. So this one helps you sacrifice a creature, it helps you gain life, and it helps you draw cards. So this is just the perfect storm of things that you can do for 1 card. Next, let's talk about the instants and sorceries for this deck. We have 2 different sections here. We're going to have removal, and then we're going to have card draw. So as far as the removal goes, we have Eaten Alive. It has a additional cost of either sacrificing a creature or paying 4, but you get to exile a creature or a planeswalker, and sacrificing a creature is pretty much what you're going to do for the most part because of all your self-returning guys. Fragmentize, 1 to cast sorcery that destroys an artifact or enchantment with a mana value of 4 or less. This helps get rid of a lot of stuff. Power Stone Fracture, 2 to cast sorcery. There is an additional cost of either sacrificing an artifact or a creature, and you destroy target creature or planeswalker. Sanctify, 2 to cast sorcery that destroys target artifact or enchantment, and you gain 3 life. Disenchant, obviously that's just, a no-brainer. Rite of Oblivion, a 2 to cast sorcery with an additional cost of sacrificing a non-land permanent. You exile target non-land permanent, and then you can do it again later for 4 as a flashback. Despark, exiles a permanent with a mana value of 4 or greater for 2 at instant speed. Fracture, another instant for 2. Destroy target artifact, enchantment, or planeswalker. Invoke the Divine, 3 to cast instant that destroys an artifact or enchantment and you gain 4 life. Angelic Purge, a 3 to cast sorcery that as an additional cost to cast it, you must sacrifice a permanent, but you get to exile target artifact, creature, or enchantment. Mortify, 3 to cast instant that destroys a creature or an enchantment. Bake into a Pie is a 4 to cast instant that destroys a creature, and you create a food token. So most of this removal was multi-layered, so you can destroy more than one thing. This one only destroys one thing, but it creates a food token, which this is a life gain deck, which is why this is in here. And then the next 3 are going to be similar to each other. So Yeheni's Expertise is a 4 to cast sorcery that all creatures get -3/-3 until end of turn. And then you may cast a card with a mana value of 3 or less from your hand without paying its mana cost. Most of Black's board wipes are either mana intensive, so 6 or more, or if they are less than 6, they're $20. So that's why this, and then of the next 2. Things like Languish, 4 to cast sorcery, all creatures get -4/-4 until end of turn. And then the one that I liked the most was Blight Grenade. It's a 5 to cast sorcery that starts off by destroying target creature, and then giving all creatures -3/-3 until end of turn. So those are the removal spells that I went with. And then there's only a couple of draw cards here. We have things like Village Rites. As an additional cost to cast this, you have to sacrifice a creature and you get to draw 2 cards. Foreboding Fruit, free to cast sorcery, target player draws 2 cards and loses 2 life. But it has an adamant ability, which means that if you spent 3 black mana to cast it, you also create a food token. And then this isn't really a card draw card so much as it helps get cards into your hand. This is the best tutor for a deck like this. It's Final Parting. It's 5 to cast, where you get to search your library for 2 cards. You put one of them into your hand and one of them into your graveyard. So you're going to search for self-returners on the one that goes to your graveyard, and then whatever you need in the moment as the other card. Next, I'm going to show you the enchantment part of this deck. They're all utility-based, and they all do something a little different. First one is Vampiric Rites. It's a 1 to cast enchantment that for 2 and sacrificing a creature, you gain a life and you draw a card. All great stuff. It's a life gain deck, and drawing cards is actually a must for this kind of a deck. Ghoulish Procession is a 2 to cast enchantment that says whenever 1 or more non-token creatures die. It doesn't have to be your creature either. You create a 2/2 black zombie creature token with Decayed, and this ability triggers only once each turn, but it doesn't have to be only your turn. It can be on an opponent's turn too. Oversold Cemetery, it's very similar to Viconia. It's a 2 to cast enchantment that says at the beginning of your upkeep, if you have 4 or more creature cards in your graveyard, you may return a creature card from your graveyard to your hand. This is a redundant way for me to help get cards that don't return themselves back into your hand. Hidden Stockpile, 2 to cast enchantment with Revolt, and its Revolt is at the beginning of your end step. If a permanent you controlled left the battlefield this turn, you create a 1/1 colorless servo artifact creature token. That's good. It helps give you blockers. It's not the reason why it's in here, but it's helpful. The reason it's in here is because it's a sack outlet. So for 1, you can sacrifice a creature and scry 1. And scrying 1 isn't as good as drawing a card, but it's damn close because it lets you choose to get rid of a bad card from the top of your library and hope that the next card is a good one. Last enchantment is just for pure fun. I thought this was a funny card to add. It's called Ill-Gotten Inheritance. It's a 4 to cast enchantment that says at the beginning of your upkeep, it will deal 1 damage to each opponent and you will gain a life. Then it has an ability that for 6, you can sacrifice it and it deals 4 damage to target opponent and you gain 4 life. That part you're not going to really do. You're going to want it out there to continually drain your opponents of health and give you health. And the last section that we'll go over is the artifacts. Again, more utility. So we start off with Witch's Cauldron. It's a 1 to cast artifact that for 2 tapping and sacrificing creature, you gain a life and draw a card. Sound familiar? Vat of Rebirth is a 1 to cast artifact that says whenever an artifact or creature you control is put into your graveyard from the battlefield, you put an oil counter on it, and then for 3 and tapping it, and removing 4 of those oil counters from it, you can return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield, but only as a sorcery. This is a repeatable way to get cards from your graveyard back into play for you. That's super helpful, especially for things that don't self-return. Mirror Shield, as you should know by now that I use this as my budget Lightning Greaves or Swiftfoot Boots. It's a way to give a creature on your battlefield hexproof, and it gives it a little bonus on its toughness just in case. And then the last card in the deck is Relic Vial. It's a 3 to cast artifact that you can pay 2, tap it, and sacrifice a creature to draw a card. However, that last ability here is why I like this so much. It says as long as you control a cleric, which most of the Soul Sisters and even some of the vampires that whenever you gain a life, your opponents lose a life, are clerics. As long as you control a cleric, whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent will now lose a life and you will gain a life. This does a lot of things you really want, and it fits very well into this deck. As far as a combo goes for this build, sadly I was unable to include one like I usually try to, solely because of price. However, if you want to spend the extra money, or you just happen to have one on hand, adding an Exquisite Blood to the deck will add an infinite gain and drain combo possibility with any card that reads like Marauding Blight Priest does. I've included a few of them right out of the box, but there are a few more out there that you could add later if you feel so inclined to do so. And that, my fellow Spellslingers, was Elas Il-Kor Sadistic Pilgrim, my latest budget commander deck that will be available for sale on the Blue Bears Games Facebook page. If you're interested in purchasing this or any of my other budget decks, just send me a message through the Facebook page as it's currently the only way I'm making them available at the moment. This is one of my favorite decks to play currently because it has so much synergy and fun stuff to do. While the ultimate goal is to slowly drain all of your opponent's health totals to 0, the sheer amount of ways to do so is quite vast. While the concept is very simple, if you have issues keeping track of triggers, this will test you on that. However, There is no better way to learn than by doing, which is the point of my builds. One last thing real quick that I want to mention is that even though I don't do upgrade guides for my budget builds anymore, this was based off of my own personal build that I mentioned earlier. That means that you can use that video as an upgrade guide for this deck, and I implore you to do so. Well folks, sadly that's all I've got for you this week. Thanks for watching, and if you're looking for more Magic content to watch, please go browse my playlist as I'm sure you'll find more videos that you'll enjoy. Before you go though, please smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet, so you can be notified when I release new content, which I do every Friday. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll see you all next week.